Though the situation is improving, the fallout from the initial shutdowns of places of worship and its lingering effects are still being felt. To give us their experiences about the effects these shutdowns have had on their communities, we're joined now by Rabbi Mitch Rocklin, the president of the Jewish Coalition for Religious Liberty, Jason Adkins, the director and general counsel of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, and EWTN executive editor and Washington, D.C. bureau chief, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today for this important discussion. Jason, you and Bishop Hying were at the forefront of both pastorally suspending Mass, but then reopening 2 months later. What made opening so urgent for you in May?
Well, we need to get the sacraments to our people. The Eucharist is the source and summit of our life, and we believe the sacraments are efficacious. They're not just a wafer that you receive, but they are transformative. They're transformative of our own lives and help us transform the world. And there was a deep hunger in our community for the Eucharist. People had been receiving the sacraments in a creative way, especially confession, but people were really hungering for the Eucharist, and we wanted to make it available. So when our governor invited businesses and organizations to present plans for reopening, we did that and worked really assiduously with our government and government officials to reopen our churches here, and then ultimately had to say we were going to do this because the state doesn't have jurisdiction over when and how divine worship is offered.
And in June, under the Madison-Dane County's previous order, shopping malls, bars, restaurants, all these other commercial entities were allowed to open at 25% capacity, while houses of worship were subject to an arbitrary 50% cap, right, regardless of how large the church building was. How long did that last?
Well, I can't speak for what happened in Wisconsin. Here in Minnesota, there was, retail therapy seemed to be the order of the day. Shopping might be a religion for some, but it doesn't replace the real thing. And so bars, restaurants, pet grooming, shopping centers, casinos, pet grooming industries, medical cannabis, abortion clinics were even open, but religious services were closed. And so when that came to pass, we said that we need to do a different way. We said we're going to open our churches. We can do it safely. We presented a plan. And eventually the governor came to the table and we negotiated something that allowed up to 250 people or 25% capacity. And then a few weeks later, that was changed to 50% capacity. But the government can't treat religious organizations or churches in a discriminatory fashion, even during a pandemic. There's no pandemic exception to the Constitution, and we're going to be sure to assert our rights and our religious liberties.
And religious liberty affects not just the Catholic community, but other religious groups. Rabbi Rocklin, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're on your way back from your Army chaplain duty. In addition to fighting for religious liberty, you're also part of our armed services. Thank you for your service. Why was suing to open up Jewish schools so important to your community in New York?
Sure, yeah. I'm on my way back from the National Guard duty right now, but I'm on the civilian side. My main work is focused on Jewish schools, which, it's interesting for the Orthodox Jewish community, of which I'm a member. Schools are actually, in a way, even more important than places of worship. Places of worship are very important. Synagogues are lifeblood of the community. But in some ways, religious schools for Orthodox Jews are even more important because they have a very large array of religious studies that really inculcate children with the faith from a young age. And it's really part of a community. And so when the pandemic hit, Jewish schools made tremendous efforts to institute safety precautions of all sorts. But even schools, we had one school that we helped represent together with the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. And the school had 0 cases of COVID. It was actually the safest place that a student could be. But Governor Cuomo sought to shut it down along with so many other schools. So we sued to reopen them.
And why was this anti-Semitic targeting by Governor Cuomo so dangerous? I know that last year's FBI hate crimes report showed an uptick in crimes against the Jewish community. Was this a coincidence?
We do not think it's a coincidence. We think that the way that the governor spoke at a press conference, stereotyping Orthodox Jews, using photographs of gatherings that he claimed happened recently, but were actually many years old, even from before the pandemic, implying that Jews are gathering in large numbers all over the place. Along with some of his recent comments about Orthodox Jews that were reported, we really saw anti-Jewish animosity, which really has a very dark history and something that we would hope never to see in the United States or New York specifically.
Anti-Semitism is the original hate. Matthew, can you explain why closures for the Catholic community are so devastating?
Well, it can be summed up as we've heard from a number of people in this discussion, as well as in Colin Flynn's package. We are a sacramental church, not a virtual one. So the closing of churches was, to use your word, a devastating one for Catholics to be cut off from the source and summit of our life, the Eucharist. But at a time also when, depending upon your poll, as few as 50% of Catholics believe ardently in the real presence. This is also setting a disturbing and heartbreaking precedent, potentially, of telling Catholics basically that Mass really just isn't that important. And we're also shutting down churches at a time when they were most badly needed to provide pastoral and spiritual care to people in the midst of a pandemic. And then there are the host of religious liberty questions that have been distressing to Catholics from the very beginning of this pandemic.
Jason, one of the questions that many were asking themselves and are still asking now is bringing people back into churches affecting the spread of COVID-19? What can you tell us about that?
That hasn't been the experience in Minnesota at all. Even during our state's contact tracing efforts over the past year, churches were rather quickly dropped from that because we were proving to be safe environments and not being culprits in the spread of COVID. Obviously, there's a risk anytime you walk out your door. People are not obligated to come to Mass. They're still not obligated in Minnesota to come to Mass in person because there is a dispensation. But we've proven time and time again that our places are not a source of community spread. We presented a plan early in the pandemic. We've made good on that. We've been collaborative with public health officials, which we should be. But ultimately, we can't be treated in a discriminatory fashion because faith is important. The Eucharist matters. Our faith matters. And it's important that the church stand up for that and make that present to people because we do serve the well-being of the community. Home Depot is really important, I know, but liquor stores were kept open, and unfortunately, preventable alcohol deaths in 2020 increased by almost 20% here in Minnesota because it seems that liquor stores and the comfort they provide were more important than some of the things that religious gatherings provide to people.
That's very frustrating. I know for the Archbishop, it's one of the comments that he made about being able to bring people back for AA meetings. Rabbi Rocklin, you speak for the Jewish community on many religious freedom issues. What was it like knowing that you were partnering alongside the Diocese of Brooklyn in reopening your houses of worship?
Yeah, one thing that we can look at this as a silver lining. Really, but an opportunity for more solidarity is that unfortunately, due to some of the regulations that were targeted at religious groups, I think that it brought people of faith together from many different backgrounds. There's been some polling data actually showing that Americans may be growing more religious over the course of the pandemic, despite being away from houses of worship. And it was definitely it was definitely heartening. We heard from a lot of different people from a lot of different faith backgrounds and work together with them. And hopefully that's a positive development going forward that we'll see more solidarity.
Jason, the Chauvin conviction was announced this week. The Washington Post noted that religious leaders are needed to have these important conversations about race, talking about this interfaith and religious impulse that Rabbi Rocklin brought up. Was this the case in Minnesota?
Absolutely. It's important for people are looking for answers. We've seen in our discussions with political leaders, especially this legislative session, that people are really struggling as they're a time of polarization, pulling people apart. That vital center doesn't seem to be as holding as well, and people are looking for new answers. And I think the church is uniquely positioned to step in that conversation and say, who are we? What is our identity? Let's not make secondary our identities our fundamental ones. Let's talk about who we are as children of God. Whatever, in Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, we're all children of God, and that should be the defining way in which we view ourselves and how we view our neighbor, and we should treat them accordingly, made in his image and his likeness. And so there's a real appetite, I think, right now, especially during these deep, polarizing conversations, for a perspective about who we are and how we define ourselves and how we should treat our brothers and sisters.
That's right, Jason. Matthew, quick last question to you. Can you talk to us about EWTN's coverage of the lockdowns? How was it unique? How was it different?
It was unique because EWTN was able to lead the way in so many ways in streaming masses, in providing Eucharistic adoration to millions around the world. On the news side, we were able to look at how the church adapted, how parishes adapted to overcoming that digital divide at that particular moment. We're also obviously covering the development of the religious liberty battles, and then also the very Catholic, important Catholic perspective of the ethics involved with the vaccines. So we're really trying to provide a service to Catholics and all people of good conscience around the world.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. This is an important thing we're going to continue to watch.